The night was tearing itself apart above her, lightning splitting the sky open in wild, angry veins, yet she kept running, stumbling through a forest that felt like it wanted to swallow her whole. Rain slammed against her skin, cold and merciless, soaking through the thin fabric clinging to her trembling body. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, each inhale scraping against the pain blooming in her ribs. She pressed a shaking hand against her bleeding side, felt the warmth leaking through her fingers, and forced herself forward anyway. She didn't have a choice. Not tonight. The ground was a maze of twisted roots and waterlogged leaves, and every step threatened to send her crashing down. But behind her, far too close, came the low, rolling growls that made her chest tighten with dread. Wolves. Not just any wolves. Them. Her past. Her mistakes. The ones who wanted her anchored to a life she had barely escaped with her sanity. She could hear their paws pounding against the soaked earth, pushing through the storm like it was nothing, driven by something darker than duty, darker than hate. Her heart tightened painfully. She didn't have the strength for this. Her wolf was exhausted. Her human body was failing her. And that power deep inside her, that strange, shifting heat that flickered under her skin like silver fire, was starting to pulse. Not gently. Not controllably. It felt like a warning. A threat. A reminder that she was no longer just running from them, she was running from herself. Thunder cracked so loudly it felt like the world split open. She flinched, misstepped, and her foot slid out from beneath her. She pitched forward, grabbing at empty air as the ground tilted sharply. The edge of a ravine yawned in front of her, hidden beneath fog so thick it curled like hands ready to drag her into the dark. She stopped just in time, boots skidding dangerously close to the drop. The fog rose higher, swallowing her breath, whispering along her skin with cold fingers. It made the forest feel unreal, dreamlike, like she was drifting between worlds and didn't fully belong to either one. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat shudder against her palm. That silver flame flickered again, hot and sharp, lighting her veins with a painful glow. She clenched her jaw, holding her breath, trying to keep it locked deep inside. Not here. Not when she was this exposed. Not with them so close. Please, her voice cracked, softer than the storm, barely a breath. Not now. Her wolf whimpered inside her mind. The instinct to shift trembled at the edges of her bones, but she wouldn't, let that fire slip. Because when it came out, she didn't always come back the same. Another howl split the air behind her, closer this time, vibrating through the trees. Her pulse spiked. She pushed herself away from the edge and forced her legs back into motion, even as they trembled under her. Every movement felt wrong, heavy, like her body belonged to someone else. Rain dripped into her eyes. Wind slapped branches across her face. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The forest moved around her in flashes of shadow and light. Leaves slapped against her cheeks. Mud sucked at her boots. Her breath fogged in the cold air, mingling with the mist curling around her like smoke. Every sound felt sharper, branches snapping, paws pounding, the echo of her own ragged breathing. Her senses strained against the storm, trying to separate danger from darkness, fear from instinct. Then, something shifted. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even movement. It was a presence, sudden, heavy, powerful enough to make her stumble mid-stride. Her vision blurred. A wave of heat swept up her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck rose, and for a split second she forgot about the wolves behind her, the storm above her, or the blood leaking down her side. This feeling, this awareness, was different. Older. Deeper. Like the forest itself had inhaled and was now holding its breath. She turned instinctively, even though she couldn't see anything through the curtain of rain. Her heartbeat throbbed in her ears. The silver flame under her skin sparked again, stronger this time, as if reacting to something it recognized. And then she saw it. A shadow. Massive. Moving with silent purpose above the treeline. It didn't run. It didn't stalk. It glided, almost weightless, like gravity wasn't a rule it ever cared to follow. Its silhouette shifted, wolf and something more, bigger than any creature she had ever seen. Her breath caught. Something ancient was watching her. Not the wolves snapping at her heels. Not the pack that had already taken too much from her. This was something else. Something that made the ground tremble. Something that made the storm hesitate as though it, too, didn't dare get in the way. Her pulse stumbled. Adrenaline surged. She felt her knees weaken under the weight of that unseen gaze. It wasn't hunting her. It wasn't helping her. It was simply there, watching, studying, deciding. A gust of wind slammed into her, snapping her hair across her face. She blinked rain from her lashes, staring at the place where the shadow had been, where it still was. She could feel it, but when she looked again, the shape was gone, swallowed by darkness. The forest was silent for a beat. Too silent. As if even the storm wanted to know what would happen next. Behind her, the howls stopped. She froze. Something told her not to turn around. Something told her the danger behind her was nothing compared to the presence ahead of her. And through the panic, the pain, the exhaustion, something else flickered. A spark of wonder. A spark of fear. A spark of recognition she didn't understand. Her hand shook against her ribs as she whispered to no one and everyone at once. "Who's there?" Only the storm answered. Only the shadows breathed. And somewhere deep in the dark, something shifted closer. Her pulse hammered. Her mind screamed to run. But something inside her, something ancient, something tied to that silver flame she'd never learned to control, held her still. Just for a moment. Just long enough to know. She was no longer running alone. And whatever had found her, wasn't letting her go. A breath of wind curled around her ear, carrying a whisper that didn't belong to the storm. Before the storm breaks, don't forget to subscribe to Moonlight Desires for more stories that claw their way into your heart. She stumbled toward the fallen log, vision smearing the world into streaks of rain and shadow. Her legs finally gave out, folding beneath her as the cold ground rushed up to meet her. Mud splashed against her arms. The breath punched out of her lungs. Pain flared through her ribs, sharp enough to steal the last thread of strength she had left. She pressed her forehead to the bark, trying to pull one clean breath into her shaking chest, but the forest spun, tilting, narrowing. Then came the sound. Boots. Heavy. Steady. Cutting through the wet earth with a rhythm too controlled to belong to any hunter chasing her. Each step carried weight, authority, something ancient that pressed against her senses until the air grew tight around her lungs. She tried to lift her head, but the world stayed blurry, refusing to cooperate. And then a voice, low, dark, undeniably male, broke through the storm. He said her name. Not guessed. Not whispered uncertainly. Spoke it like he had carried it with him for a very long time. Her heart lurched so violently she thought it might split. She had never told him her name. She had never spoken to him at all. Yet the moment his voice touched the air, something deep inside her stirred, something that recognized him long before her mind caught up. The rain softened for a heartbeat, as though making room for him. He stepped from between the trees, and the night seemed to shift around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair clinging to his jaw in the storm's downpour. His eyes, gods, those eyes, burned gold even with rain dripping over his lashes. Not a flicker. Not an illusion. A steady, molten light that locked onto her like he'd been searching the whole forest only to find her collapsed at his feet. He didn't move toward her. He didn't kneel. He simply looked at her, slow, deliberate, unblinking. Studying her as though she was a secret he'd waited years to unravel. The kind of gaze that stripped away the space between two souls, leaving nothing but truth in its wake. Her throat tightened. Her voice barely came out. "Why, are you here?" The question trembled at the edges, not from fear alone, but because she already sensed the answer would burn. His jaw flexed, rain sliding down the sharp line of it. His voice dropped lower, rougher, the storm seeming to lean in to hear him. "I've been sensing you. 4 weeks. Her breath caught. The silver flame beneath her skin pulsed once, hot and warning. She dragged her shaking hand away from her wound, trying to anchor herself, but his gaze followed the movement, like he felt every tremor inside her body as clearly as she did. He didn't offer help. He didn't reach for her. He simply shifted his stance, one foot angled toward the darkness behind her, body positioned between her and the threat approaching through the rain. The gesture wasn't tender. It wasn't warm. It was instinctive, protective in a way that made something deep inside her chest crack open. The wind carried the low growl of approaching wolves. They were close. Too close. She tried to warn him, but before the words reached her lips, he moved. The Alpha King didn't transform with ceremony or show. His power rippled out of him like a silent explosion, cracking the air, making the earth itself react. The wolves lunged from the shadows, and he met them with savage, terrifying precision. Claws, real claws, tore through the storm. A flash of golden eyes. A body moving too fast to follow. He brought one attacker down with a single strike, turned, caught another by the throat, and slammed it into the mud so hard the ground shook beneath her palms. This wasn't a fight. It was domination. He didn't look back at her. Not once. But she felt every movement echo inside her bones, like her body was responding to a rhythm only he commanded. When the last wolf whimpered and fell silent, the forest went still again, breathless, watching. The alpha straightened slowly, shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. Rain slid down his arms, over hands where claws retracted 1 inch at a time, as though he was forcing the shift back under his skin by sheer will alone. He turned toward her with a kind of restrained violence still simmering around his edges, like he hadn't fully returned to himself yet. He stepped closer, boots sinking into the mud, golden eyes locked onto her with a heat that made her heart falter. She should have been afraid. She was. But layered beneath the fear was something else, something magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. A pull that went beyond survival. Beyond instinct. Something old, like destiny bending the world a little closer around them. She lifted her gaze to meet his. And the storm didn't feel nearly as loud as the silence between them. He led her through the storm without a word, guiding her toward a dark shape tucked beneath a ridge of stone, an old shelter, barely standing, its wooden beams warped by years of rain and wind. The forest muffled around them, as though the trees themselves agreed to grant her a moment of safety. She stepped inside first, breath shallow, ribs aching. The storm hissed against the roof, but the small space held pockets of warmth where the wind couldn't reach. She lowered herself onto the floor, back pressed to the wall, trying to hide the tremor still running through her hands. He stood near the entrance, watching the rain for a moment before turning toward her. His gaze swept over her, not searching for injury, not assessing weakness, but studying the way she pulled her arm close to her body, how she avoided leaning on anything for support, how her eyes kept tracking the shadows as if expecting to be dragged back into the night. The silence felt heavier than the storm. Her breath grew uneven, and memories slipped forward before she could stop them. She remembered the shifting grounds, open fields under a red horizon, where she once stood with hope still warm inside her. She could still hear the elders' voices echoing over the stone, could still feel the moment their eyes widened when the silver flame flared beneath her skin. Not a spark. Not a harmless flicker. A burst, bright, hot, uncontrolled, lighting her body with a glow no wolf in their pack had ever seen. Fear. That had been the first reaction. Not awe. Not pride. Fear. They whispered she was cursed. They whispered she was touched by something they didn't understand. They whispered she would destroy what she was meant to protect. Every cruel word had carved itself deep until the whispers became truth in her own mind. She remembered the night they chased her from the grounds, her wolf half-shifted, stumbling, confused, begging for a chance to explain a power she never asked for. Torches lit the dirt around her. Ropes swung overhead. The elders declared her dangerous, announced she would burn her destiny into ashes if left unchecked. Her throat tightened as she tried to steady herself in the cabin. She pulled her knees close, wrapping her arms around them because they were the only arms she trusted. The ache in her ribs sharpened when she moved, but the ache in her chest hurt worse, old, familiar, carved into her bones. He watched quietly, not intruding. His presence grounded the space, but it also sharpened her awareness of everything she feared. She hated being seen like this, wounded, exposed, trembling around memories she'd spent years burying. She hated how her body recoiled from the idea of touch. She hated how deeply the rejection had shaped her instincts. And she hated that this alpha, made her chest tighten in ways that frightened her more than any enemy outside. She didn't trust alphas. Not their promises, not their power, not the ease with which they decided someone's fate. Alphas had stood above her when the elders condemned her. Alphas had nodded when she was cast out. Alphas had turned their backs. But this one made her heartbeat slow and speed up all at once. She glanced toward him, and he didn't look away. His expression didn't soften, but something in it shifted, something she wasn't ready to name. She reached for a torn cloth near the wall, pressing it to her wound with a strained breath. Her fingers shook, and she dropped the cloth. The sound was small, barely audible, but he stepped closer with careful, controlled movements, as though approaching a creature that had been wounded too many times. He crouched nearby, not touching, not offering more than proximity. His gaze settled on her injury, then lifted back to her face, waiting for permission that she didn't know how to give. The tension between them held steady, stretching thin in the dim light. He spoke softly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "I know what you are." Her heart stuttered. Her breath stalled. But there was no accusation in his tone. No warning. Only recognition, steady, calm, like someone naming a truth he had already accepted. He continued, voice low. "Your bloodline hasn't been seen in generations. The silver flame, it doesn't choose lightly." Her fingers curled against her leg, nails biting into her skin to keep herself grounded. He shifted his gaze to the storm outside before speaking again. "There was a time I was afraid of my own power too." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to comfort. They slipped from him like truth he hadn't spoken aloud in years. She watched him carefully, the distance between them shrinking without either of them moving. The storm raged, but inside the shelter, a different kind of storm built, quiet, intimate, charged with something that neither of them fully understood yet. No touch passed between them. But the connection grew anyway, slow and deep, threading between their breaths like something ancient awakening. Dawn found them already moving, the storm washed clean from the sky but still clinging to her skin. Mist curled around their legs as they walked, each step carrying her deeper into a terrain she didn't recognize, yet her pulse quickened as though some hidden part of her had walked it 1,000 times. He stayed a few strides ahead, his movements silent, his senses tuned to every shift in the forest. She followed, wary, drawn, unsettled by the way his presence steadied the air around her. The trees changed first. Their trunks grew pale, their branches stretched wider, and thin silver petals drifted downward in slow spirals. They glowed faintly even in the weak light of morning. She reached out, catching one on her palm. It dissolved into warmth the instant it touched her skin, leaving a shimmer that pulsed once before fading. She froze. He didn't turn, but his voice carried back to her, calm, certain. "They only fall for bloodline heirs." Her breath tightened. She wanted to deny the way the forest responded to her, but something stirred beneath her ribs, a quiet thrum that matched the shimmer left by the petal. The ground beneath her feet softened, moss glowing faintly as though acknowledging her steps. And then she saw them, wolves, half-shadowed, watching from the edges of the path. Their ears flattened. Their heads bowed. Not to him. To her. Confusion twisted her stomach. "Why are they?" "They recognize what you carry," he said, finally turning to face her. His eyes glowed gold in the morning light. "Even if you don't." He motioned forward. They walked until the forest opened, revealing a hollow of stone cradled by towering trees. The air thickened with ancient energy, the kind that hummed against her skin like a distant heartbeat. At the center lay a crater, its edges carved with runes worn smooth by centuries of wind. The earth here felt older than language, older than packs, older than anything she'd ever been taught. She stepped closer, and the runes lit. Not brightly. Not violently. A slow, steady pulse. A quiet recognition. Her fingertips burned, a sting that was not pain but memory awakening. She lifted her hand without thinking, letting her fingers hover above the glowing stone. The light followed her, tracing her movements like an old friend remembering her shape. He watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher, part reverence, part fear, part inevitability. "You feel it," he said quietly. "Don't deny it." Her throat tightened as the runes brightened. Heat pooled beneath her skin, rising through her chest, pressing against her heart like a force demanding to be acknowledged. He stepped beside her now, the closest he'd stood since the cabin. His voice lowered, each word measured. "There is an old legend, older than any kingdom, older than the packs themselves." She clenched her fists, bracing. He continued. "The child born of silver flame shall rise when the Alpha Kingdom fractures." Runes flared. She will either save or burn the bond that holds the packs together. Her pulse hammered. The air thickened. The stone glowed brighter under her feet. "I'm not part of any prophecy," she said, but her voice trembled. "You are," he replied. "The forest knows you. The wolves bow to you. The runes awaken at your touch." She shook her head, but denial crumbled as visions split open inside her mind, shadows of ancestors standing in a ring of fire, their eyes glowing silver, ancient wolves howling beneath a fractured moon, battles she'd never lived, wounds she'd never taken, voices whispering her name from centuries away. She staggered back, breath ripping from her chest. He caught her elbow, not tightly, just enough to anchor her, and for the first time his touch didn't ignite fear. It grounded her as the visions passed like thunder rolling back into the horizon. When she looked up, his gaze held hers with unshakable certainty. "Your destiny didn't begin today," he murmured. "It only finally caught up to you." The runes burned brighter, and the air shifted. As though the world itself exhaled in recognition of what she was becoming. The runes were still pulsing beneath her feet when the first shout ripped through the grove, sharp, angry, too close. The Alpha's head snapped toward the tree lean, his posture shifting, shoulders squaring as though a blade had been drawn against his spine. She felt the sudden drop in the air, a pressure change before the storm breaks. And then they emerged. 4 of his warriors stepped into the clearing, soaked in sweat and rain, their armor smeared with mud. Their expressions were carved from distrust. Their eyes never touched the runes, never touched their king. They fixed solely on her. One pointed, jaw tight. "This is what we sensed. This is the disturbance." Another stepped forward. "You brought her here? To the grove?" He spat the last word as though it had been tainted. The Alpha moved in front of her without hesitation, stance widening, voice edged with command. "Watch your tone." But the warriors didn't bow. They traded glances, accusing, fearful, simmering with the kind of hostility that comes from long-held superstition. "She's the source of the sabotage," one said. "The reason the border runes collapsed." "She's dangerous," another added. "We should take her before she burns the rest of us." She stiffened. The words weren't new. She'd heard them before, whispered, shouted, carved into her exile. But hearing them here, in a place awakening to her presence, sliced deeper than she expected. The Alpha's growl was low, controlled only by the thinnest thread. "She is under my protection." The warriors didn't back down. One lifted his chin. "Then you're risking your crown for a stranger." Before the Alpha could answer, a new voice cut through the grove, smooth, cold, and unmistakably triumphant. "She isn't a stranger to me." A rival Alpha stepped out from between the trees, flanked by his own pack. His presence twisted the air. His gaze locked onto her with cruel familiarity, and her stomach dropped. She knew that voice. She knew that smirk. She'd run from both. "There you are," he said, walking as though he owned the ground beneath him. "The cursed flame returns to finish what she started." Her breath hitched, muscles locking. Every memory she'd buried surged forward, his pack dragging her across the shifting grounds, their voices calling her an omen, their elders debating whether to cage her or kill her. He'd stood at the center of it all, watching with satisfied detachment. The Alpha King stepped closer to her, voice dropping to a protective rumble. "She doesn't belong to you." But the rival Alpha only smiled. "She always has. Her power nearly destroyed my lands, and the moment she fled, my territory healed. Don't pretend your kingdom hasn't felt her corruption too." She flinched. The accusation wasn't new, but hearing it thrown in front of another pack, another Alpha, shame crawled under her skin, tightening her throat. She couldn't meet anyone's eyes, not his, not the rivals, not the warriors who watched her like a threat ready to ignite. The tension cracked like lightning. Both packs moved closer. Bodies crowded the grove, forming a ring that felt too much like a trial. The air charged. The runes dimmed beneath her feet, retreating as though sensing the conflict spiraling beyond their ancient boundaries. The Alpha King's voice was tight, torn between fury and restraint. "This is not your territory. Leave. And let her poison yours instead," the rival Alpha countered. "No. If you value your crown, hand her over." Silence swallowed the grove. Warriors shifted. Wolves bristled. The world waited. She saw it then, the fracture inside the Alpha King. Duty pulling him one way, something more dangerous pulling him toward her. His jaw clenched. His hands curled. His eyes flickered gold, but the indecision behind them wounded her more than the rival's accusations. She stepped away. She didn't want him choosing between her and his kingdom. She'd lived through that once, an Alpha choosing power over her life, and she refused to watch another version of that nightmare unfold. With a breath that tasted like ash, she turned. "I'll go." He reached for her but stopped himself, fingers trembling as though restrained by invisible chains. Her voice remained steady even as her chest cracked open. "You don't owe me anything." The grove felt colder as she walked past the warriors, past the rival Alpha, past wolves that bared their teeth as she passed. She kept her gaze forward. She didn't look back. Not when the Alpha King called her name. Not when she felt the weight of his conflict press against her spine like a shadow begging her to turn. She left the grove before she could witness him choose his people over her. Before she saw whether the world was right about her all along. Night settled thick and heavy around her, the kind of darkness that pressed against the skin and made every breath feel colder. She'd chosen a small clearing near a crooked boulder, its overhang catching just enough moonlight to keep the shadows from swallowing her whole. Her body trembled uncontrollably, part exhaustion, part the crash that always came after she forced herself to be strong for too long. She wrapped her arms around her ribs, trying to hold everything together before it split apart. When the first twig snapped behind her, she didn't flinch. She was too tired to run and too numb to care if danger finally caught up. But when he stepped into view, his movements were slow, careful, deliberate, as though he were approaching a wounded creature that might lash out from pure instinct. His expression wasn't hard like before. It was stripped raw. And when he dropped to one knee in front of her, it wasn't in dominance or authority. It was something else entirely. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, really looked, at the way her breath hitched, at the tremor in her fingers, at the stubborn set of her jaw that cracked whenever she was close to breaking. She turned her face away, embarrassed by how fragile she must seem. "You shouldn't have followed me," she said quietly. He shook his head. "And you shouldn't have walked away thinking I would let you face them alone." She let out a shaky exhale, unable to respond. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers but never touching, giving her full control over the space between them. That alone made her chest tighten. Alphas never asked permission. but he did, every time. Minutes passed before he finally spoke again, voice low and unsteady. I know what it feels like, to lose control. She looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes weren't glowing with power now. They were filled with something quieter, regret. Old, heavy regret that lived under the skin like a bruise that never healed. He sat beside her, close enough to share warmth but not close enough to trap her. His hands rested on his knees, palms open, a gesture of vulnerability she'd never seen from him. There was someone once, he said. Someone I loved. The words cracked at the edges. I lost control during a shift. Just for a moment. One heartbeat. And that was all it took to hurt her. Her breath caught. She could see the memory tightening his jaw, drawing shadows beneath his eyes. She survived, he continued softly, but she never looked at me the same again. I swore after that night that I would never let myself feel anything deep enough to risk losing control like that again. She swallowed hard. And then you sensed me. His laugh was faint, humorless. And then I sensed you. The wind shifted, carrying embers of moonlight through the clearing. When she reached to adjust her sleeve, their wrists brushed, barely a touch. But the effect was immediate. Her silver flame flickered beneath her skin, rising like a startled breath. A thin line of light sparked from her wrist to his, illuminating the space between them. He didn't pull back. He didn't even blink. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, until his fingers covered hers with a gentleness she wasn't prepared for. The flame answered him, soft at first, then brighter, curling warm and electric along her pulse. She looked up at him, eyes wide, breath trapped in her throat. His voice dropped to a whisper, the kind meant only for her. I see you, he murmured. All of you. Even the parts that terrify you. Especially those. Her heart stumbled. The world seemed to narrow to the inches separating their faces. His breath warmed her cheek, slow and steady. He leaned in, carefully, slowly, as though giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't. Not at first. Her lips hovered a breath away from his. The flame surged brighter, responding to the closeness, sending a thin silver spark dancing across the space between their mouths. Heat tugged her forward. Fear pulled her back. The spark arced once more, sharper this time, like a warning, like a promise. And she jerked away, breath shaking. The flame flickered violently under her skin, rattled by the possibility of what almost happened. She pressed her hand to her chest, backing up a step, shaken by how close she'd come to giving in. He didn't reach for her. He didn't demand she'd come back. He just watched her with a softness that made escape impossible. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But for the first time, she wanted to be. Dawn had barely broken when the world she'd just begun to trust turned against her. The Alpha King had brought her back to the heart of his territory, not as a prisoner, not as a threat, but as someone he believed deserved answers. For a moment, she let herself believe she might finally belong somewhere. The council hall was carved from ancient stone, torches flickering along the walls as pack leaders gathered. Their expressions unreadable. Their murmurs sharp with curiosity. But everything shifted the moment the doors slammed open. A warrior she recognized, one who had glared at her in the grove, strode forward with the kind of certainty only a man holding a secret weapon possessed. He carried a scroll sealed with an unfamiliar rune, its edges charred as if it had been dragged through a ritual fire. His smirk was thin and triumphant. I think, he announced, our king deserves to know who he's sheltering. The Alpha stiffened instantly. Her pulse stumbled. The warrior unrolled the scroll with slow, dramatic precision, revealing symbols she wished she didn't recognize, ancestral markings, flame sigils, bloodline warnings. She is the Silverborn, the warrior declared. The one tied to the prophecy of ruin. The child said to ignite the downfall of the Alpha Kingdom. The council erupted, shouts, gasps, growls. The sound hit her like a physical strike. She felt her stomach hollow, her breath catch, her insides twist into knots she couldn't undo. Her power pulsed beneath her skin, frantic and frightened, as though begging her to run. The Alpha King moved as if to step toward her, instinctively, protectively, but the council leader raised a hand first, silencing the hall in one sharp motion. The Silverborn, the leader repeated, eyes narrowing. The one our ancestors warned us about. The one who carries the fire that blinds judgment and corrupts the bond between packs. Her throat tightened. Every word felt like a blade pressed to old wounds. This is not a blessing, another council member added. It is a curse. A threat. A danger that must be contained. Contained. Like an animal. Like a weapon people feared even before they understood it. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, but the leader didn't allow it. You brought fire into our sanctuary, he said. You brought prophecy into the heart of our kingdom. For the safety of all, you must be bound, or exiled. The hall fell dead silent. Her vision blurred at the edges. Bound. Exiled. Again. Always again. Her gaze darted instinctively to the Alpha King. Her last anchor. Her last hope. He had promised he saw her. Promised he wasn't afraid of her. But when she searched his face, she saw something she hadn't expected. Hesitation. He stepped forward, then stopped. Not because he didn't care, she felt the war happening behind his eyes, but because he was torn. Between her and everything he'd sworn to protect. Between heart and throne. Between instinct and duty. The moment stretched, fragile and devastating. Her chest cracked open. Not from anger, though it would have been easier, but from the brutal, quiet truth that she was watching him struggle to choose her. Watching doubt flicker inside the one person who had made her believe she wasn't a monster. The council took his hesitation as an answer. Restrain her, the leader ordered. The words hadn't even fully left his mouth before something inside her snapped. Runes carved along the hall erupted, little sparks at first, then blinding bursts of light. The floor trembled. Silver fire surged from her palms, uncontrolled, desperate, wild. Gasps turned to screams as the flames spiraled outward, curling around pillars, arcing toward the ceiling like living threads of moonlight. The fire didn't burn flesh, it burned lies, fear, the tension she'd held inside her for years. Her power burst free, not to destroy but to escape. She staggered back toward the doorway, eyes burning, breath trembling. She couldn't stay. Not another second. Not with everyone staring at her like she was a prophecy made flesh, not with the Alpha King frozen in that impossible moment of almost choosing her. She ran. Her fire lit the hall behind her in streaks of silver. She didn't look back, not at the council, not at the warriors, not at him. Because the truth settled heavy in her chest. She wasn't running from them. She was running from the part of her that still hoped he would call her back. Smoke drifted low across the ritual grounds, clinging to the stone slabs where offerings had once been laid for unity, now cracked, overturned, stained with panic. Wolves huddled in terrified clusters, mothers shielding their pups, elders trembling as shadows prowled the edges of the clearing. And in the center of it all stood the rival Alpha, his silhouette sharp against the rising flames he had ordered his warriors to ignite. His voice carried through the chaos like a blade scraping across bone. Bring her to me, he snarled. Or watch your pack fall. His wolves surged forward, snapping at anyone who tried to flee. The ritual drums, meant to call peace, lay shattered under his boots. He held a young wolf by the scruff, dangling him over the broken altar as though he were nothing but bait. She will come, he growled. She always runs toward the fire she creates. But for the first time in her life, she didn't run from the accusation. She ran toward it. Her footsteps echoed before her body became visible, soft at first, then strikingly clear as she stepped through the smoke like a figure carved from moonlight itself. The rival Alpha's grip faltered on the young wolf as the clearing fell into a stunned silence. Her hair lifted on a current of silver light, strands shimmering like living metal. Her skin glowed with the quiet pulse of a star just beginning to awaken. And her eyes, gods, her eyes, blazed with pure moonfire, pale and fierce, reflecting every lie, every wound, every prophecy she had once been forced to fear. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She simply said, "Boy, steady and low, let him go." The rival alpha released the wolf only because he had no choice. His legs trembled under the weight of the power she carried. "Look at you," he spat. "Pretending you're something divine. But you're just a spark waiting to burn everything in your path." She kept moving forward, each step cracking the earth beneath her feet in thin spiderweb lines. "You don't fear my fire," she said. "You fear losing control of your story." The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper, soft, layered, ancient. Her breath caught as dozens of voices braided together inside her mind. Ancestors she'd never known. Wolves whose bones rested beneath sacred soil. Spirits who had watched her exile with silent fury. Their unity hummed through her bones. "Child of silver flame, rise." Heat pulsed up her spine, warm, grounding, certain. The earth shook in response, groaning as roots tore free and stones rolled toward her like they recognized her claim. The trees bowed under an unseen pressure, their leaves trembling as if offering her their strength. The sky split open in a single streak of white fire, illuminating her like the chosen heir of something older than the packs themselves. Her hands lifted, palms glowing brighter than the flames circling the clearing. Silver fire, not wild this time, not desperate, wrapped around her fingers like silk. Obedient. Balanced. Hers. The rival alpha stumbled backward. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied. "I am not your sacrifice. I am not your weapon. And I am not the curse you tried to make me believe I was." Behind him, shadows thickened, far darker than his wolves, broader than his warriors, pulsing with an ancient hunger. Something older than their feud. Something that had slumbered beneath the ritual grounds for generations and was now waking to the scent of unleashed power. Her gaze locked on that shadow, on the creature rising behind the rival alpha, the true threat, the one hidden by old prophecies and twisted legends. The ground quivered. The sky burned silver. And she stepped forward, fire gathering at her palms, ready for a battle that would reshape the kingdom. The rival alpha wasn't her enemy. He was only the beginning. The blast of silver light vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only drifting ash and a trembling quiet that felt stolen from the breath of the world itself. No wolves cried out. No branches stirred. Even the embers of the ritual pyre refused to crackle. It was the kind of silence that follows a miracle, or a catastrophe. And she stood at the center of it, chest rising with slow, stunned breaths, her hands still faintly glowing as if the remnants of her power refused to let her go. The earth around her was scorched in a perfect, radiant circle. Fallen stones glimmered with silver threads, still warm from the force she had unleashed. And scattered at the edges, warriors, elders, the rival alpha, none of them dared move. They watched her like she had stepped out of a prophecy they had all sworn they didn't believe. She didn't speak. She didn't lower her gaze. But her eyes, still tinged with moonfire, held a quiet, fragile question she didn't dare voice. The narrator's voice softens, almost a breath against the ear. "If you had stood in that clearing, if the air burned cold and bright with her power, would you have reached for her hand? Or stepped back like everyone else, fearing the fire that could either save you, or undo you?" She didn't know the answer. And neither did they. A faint crunch of gravel pulled her from the trance. She turned just enough to see him, her mate, her almost lover, the one whose hesitation had carved a wound deeper than any blade. The Alpha King approached slowly, each step measured, as though the wrong movement might shatter whatever remained of the night's fragile balance. Ash clung to his boots. Sweat streaked the dirt on his jaw. His pulse hammered visibly at his throat. His eyes, usually fierce, unshakable, were caught somewhere between awe and fear. He stopped only a few paces away. Too close for safety. Too far for comfort. "I didn't know," he whispered, voice barely holding together. "I didn't understand what you were." Her gaze hardened, not out of anger, but out of the splintering ache of someone who once hoped he'd see her before anyone else did. You still don't. The wind shifted. The ruined ritual stones groaned under the weight of what had transpired. She wrapped her arms around herself, not in fear, but in a quiet acknowledgement of how far she had risen, and how far she still stood from anyone who might choose her without conditions. He reached out as if instinct told him to pull her close. But his hand hovered in the air, trembling, unable to bridge the last inch. She watched him struggle with that hesitation, the same hesitation that had broken her on the council floor, and something inside her moved toward a choice she wasn't ready to speak aloud. She stepped back. Not far. But far enough. His expression cracked. Don't walk away. I'm not, she said. I'm giving you space to decide whether you're standing with me, or simply watching what I become. Silver sparks drifted from her skin like fading stardust as she turned from him. The moon made a halo of her silhouette, brilliant, lonely, unclaimed. Every eye in the clearing followed her, unsure whether she was their salvation or the storm they had feared for generations. Her future stretched before her like an unlit path. And for the first time, she walked it without waiting for anyone to follow. If this story lit something in you, the narrator murmurs, intimate as a heartbeat, if her fire stirred your own, then step into her world with us. Subscribe to Moonlight Desires, where every tale burns brighter beneath the moon, and every chapter brings you closer to the truth you ache to claim. The forest swallowed her figure as she walked, each step soft but deliberate, leaving trails of silver embers flickering behind her like fleeting stars caught in the undergrowth. The trees bent slightly in reverence, or perhaps fear, as if the night itself had recognized the power she carried. The wind tugged at her hair, stirring it around her shoulders, carrying whispers of distant ancestors that mingled with the quiet crackle of her fading flame. He followed for a heartbeat, only one, careful, tentative. The Alpha King's golden eyes burned with a mix of desire and restraint, the kind that tugs at the chest and leaves it raw. He wanted to close the distance between them, to pull her into the safety of his arms, to make her stay, yet the weight of pride, duty, and fear rooted him in place. Each step she took pulled something from him, jealousy, longing, awe, and left a hollow ache where certainty once lived. She didn't glance back. She didn't need to. She could feel his gaze tracing her every movement, a tether invisible but unbreakable. The forest seemed alive with anticipation. Leaves rustled under invisible paws, shadows shifted with intent, hinting at more than what the eye could see. The silver embers clung to the air, swirling in miniature tornadoes around her, carrying the scent of fire, earth, and inevitability. A sudden rustle stopped her heart for a second. From the shadow of an ancient oak, a voice slipped out, soft, layered, impossible to ignore. She is not the only one who carries the flame. The words drifted through the clearing like smoke, curling around the trees, threading through the mist that pooled near her boots. She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing, senses straining. That voice, it wasn't meant for her alone. It carried weight, history, something older than even the rival Alpha. She felt the pull of it, a magnetic tug toward danger and discovery, and a thrill she hadn't realized she'd been craving. Behind her, the Alpha King's chest heaved, golden eyes glinting with frustration. He took another step forward, but his body betrayed him, the tension of longing, the pull of jealousy, the fear of what she might choose, rooted him in hesitation. He wanted her to wait, to look back, to let him be the one to carry her through the next storm, but the air was hers now, the night hers, and every instinct screamed that she would not be contained. The voice spoke again, low and commanding, almost intimate. The true Alpha hasn't risen yet. The words thrummed beneath her ribs, vibrating through her silver-lit veins, awakening memories she hadn't dared to touch. Flames stirred beneath her skin, flickers of potential, of power that could no longer be ignored or denied. She inhaled sharply, a thrill and a fear coiling together, and she let herself move again, faster, lighter, carried by purpose she hadn't fully understood until now. The Alpha King froze where he stood, his claws flexing in the dirt, as if the very earth beneath him reminded him he could not follow, not yet. He watched the embers swirl into the darkness, each step she took carrying the echo of prophecy, destiny, and a challenge he hadn't been ready to face. And as the night closed around her, the camera of the mind lingers on her silhouette, silver hair catching the last traces of ember light, eyes glinting like molten stars, while beneath the fading music, a heartbeat thuds slow, steady, and unyielding. The story pauses. The world waits. She is gone. But she is not finished.